Now we're going to look at Urdhva Dhanurasana, or the wheel pose. So this begins the back bending section at the end of whatever sequence you're working on, whether it's primary, intermediate, or any of the advanced sequences. You finish the practice at the end with these back bends, and then depending on which series you're working on, this back bending section gets a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. But it always has the Urdhva Dhanurasana series that we're going to do in this tutorial. All of them have that in common. And then after the back bending series, everybody goes into shoulder stand and headstand, no matter what series you're working on. So looking at Urdhva Dhanurasana, within the context of Ashtanga Yoga, we do Urdhva Dhanurasana 3 times and then forward fold. Depending if you're doing more advanced series, you do the Urdhva Dhanurasana 3 times plus some other stuff, which maybe we'll cover in some other videos. But for the purpose of primary series, you do just the base backbending sequencing, which is just the 3 Urdhva Dhanurasanas into a forward fold to release the back. So just looking at Urdhva Dhanurasana as a posture, which is what we're going to do in this video, I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. First, we're going to look at what the legs are doing, setting up the lower part of the body, and then we're going to look at what the arms are doing, setting up the upper part of the body. And then, of course, the posture is an integrated whole, so then we'll put both of those pieces together and see how they connect, see how the whole posture sort of comes together in the posture in Urdhva Dhanurasana. So first with the legs. We're going to look at the legs, starting with lying down on our back, bending the knees, and planting the feet. So you want the feet to be parallel to each other. This is important because that sort of sets up that internal rotation that you want to happen through the thighs. And, there's a lot of detail that I can get into with this posture, like, why we want to internally rotate the legs, kind of going really deep into that concept. But I'm just going to keep this sort of a little bit more intro and a little bit more superficial. And then maybe in another video we'll get a lot deeper. But the basic idea is you want the legs to internally rotate. That helps to the main reason we want to do that, and maybe just one of the reasons that kind of is like the easiest to understand, maybe not the main reason, but maybe the reason that's the easiest to understand, is that it allows us to release the lower back so that we don't compress the sacrum. So when you bring the knees out to the side, that starts to kind of activate the external rotators, which compresses the SI joints. And we want the SI joint to not be compressed. The SI joint wants to float. So we bring the feet. So in short, I can go down a lot of rabbit holes. In short, you bring the feet parallel to each other to initiate this internal rotation through the legs. So just make sure that the feet aren't turned down. And then you bend the knees. If you bring the feet like super close to the hips, that's okay. But just keep in mind that's going to make the back bend, the Urdhva Dhanurasana, really, really tight. So if you want to start off just giving yourself a little bit more space, don't bring the feet so close to the sit bones. And the feet can be aligned with the outside edges of the hips. And then, of course, you can adjust that a little bit more narrow, a little bit wider, kind of depending on what your body is asking for. And then as we go in, we can think about inhaling, take a deep breath in, and then exhale, think about reaching the knees forward. So just for the purposes of this exercise, to kind of look at and break down the lower part of the leg, we're just going to come to this point. We're not going to come all the way into the bridge pose. So we're just coming to the point of reaching the knees forward, and then the hips lift only a little bit off the floor. So you're not kind of pressing the pelvis all the way up. You're just reaching the knees forward, so you feel like the knees are reaching in front of the toes. And then from here, you can really focus on this idea of internally rotating the thighs. In other words, the inner thighs are moving down towards the floor. In other words, the pelvis is narrowing. So all of these cues are just trying to point your attention towards this action of releasing the backside of the body. You can turn the glutes on so that they're awake, but try not to squeeze the glutes towards each other, which is what happens when you let the knees splay out. So you feel this gentle inward action through the knees, not so much that they collapse, but just enough so that the knees don't splay out, to just counteract that tendency to want to let the knees splay out. And then kind of pressing through the outside edges of the heels to really feel that inner thighs rolling down and the lower back releasing. Good. And I just find that exercise of just lifting the hips a little bit is really useful in feeling that, experiencing that action of releasing the back and drawing in. So it feels like the energy is moving from the sacrum outwards, across the lower back, through the front of the hips, and then down through the inner thighs. So you can release the lower back. And that's going to be really helpful in allowing us to stretch into the front of the body without compressing the back body. Okay, now, for the upper part of the body, we are going to set up the hands and bring the hands next to the ears. So you want the fingertips pointing towards the shoulders. You can have the pointer finger reaching straight back, or you can angle the hands out a little bit. Both of those are okay. What's not okay probably is angling the hands in, because then that's when the elbows start to roll out. The general rule of thumb here is you want the elbows drawing in, because that's what brings the shoulder into external rotation. Again, we can totally go down a super deep rabbit hole here, but I'm not going to. You want the elbows to draw in because that externally rotates the shoulders, which allows the upper body, the upper back to be spacious. So same thing as the lower body. We want to open the front of the body without closing and squeezing the backside of the body. We want to spread the upper back. And what allows us to spread the upper back and therefore move into the thoracic spine is drawing the elbows in, externally rotating the shoulders. So all you really need to remember is draw the elbows in as you prepare. Another thing that I find useful is don't bring the hands so close to the ears. Give the shoulders a little bit more space so that you move the hands a little bit, there's space between the hands and the ears. So that's important so that you're not kind of limiting yourself with the amount of space you have to move into this. And now, to prepare to move into it and bring both of these pieces together, first you can start by just flipping the head and just come to the top of the head. So you kind of have to use your legs a little bit and the hands a little bit and just flip the head. And then here you can sort of just make sure your foundations are set up correctly. Spread the fingers. Remember, you can angle the hands out a little bit, but don't angle them in because look what happens to the elbows. And then the shoulders start to collapse. So fingers pointing towards your head or angled out, squeeze the elbows in. And then here, sometimes I like to do a little bit of a action of plugging the shoulders into the body. This might get you a little bit deeper into the back bend, so if it's too deep, you can skip this part. But it basically just feels like you press the hands down and back without actually moving the hands, and then that pulls the shoulders in. So it feels like you're plugging the shoulders in. And then the feet again, make sure the feet are parallel to each other, and then squeezing the knees in just enough to not let the knees splay out. And as you move into it, you're going to straighten the arms and lift the chest. Now, there's different ways of holding Urdhva Dhanurasana. You can straighten the arms and bring the chest over the wrist, or you can straighten the arms and keep the shoulders a little bit behind the wrist. And that'll just determine on, which part of the back bend you want to work on. And also, if you're really tight and it's difficult for you to straighten the arms, one focus over the other might be a little bit more accessible to go into. So maybe going into it straight with the shoulders over the wrist is not allowing you to straighten the arms because there's some flexibility in the shoulders that's missing. Then think about when you come into Urdhva Dhanurasana, think about lifting the shoulders that way towards the feet. So this just might be a little bit more accessible. Come this way instead of coming this way. Yeah? And then as you're moving into it, you want to keep this action of drawing the elbows in. And then at some point, you straighten the arms. Maybe you keep the elbows a little bit bent. Just depends on what allows you to maintain that sense of spreading the backside of the body. And then spreading the lower part of the body by the inner thighs moving down, so that as you press into the feet and press into the hands, you're really pushing through the shoulders, pushing through the feet to feel this length through the front side of the body.
You want to press through both, all 4 limbs, and relax the neck. Sometimes I get really over-enthusiastic and like look back towards my feet, which is helpful sometimes, but sometimes I just need to relax the neck. Okay, and then once you're in there, an image that really helps me to kind of feel the integration and feel the space of Urdhva Dhanurasana is thinking of the sacrum lifting up and the pubic bone sort of resting on the sacrum. So this is the pubic bone, and this is the sacrum of the pelvis. And the sacrum is what's lifting up, and the pubic bone is resting. That allows me to find that strength of the backside, because we need a strong spine to hold Urdhva Dhanurasana. It helps me to tune into the strength of my foundation so that I can release and lengthen through the front of the body, because Urdhva Dhanurasana is a back bend, but even though it's called a back bend, it's more about lengthening and stretching the front of the body. So that image of lifting through the sacrum and relaxing the pubic bone allows me to just kind of release and lengthen the front of the body, from the fingers all the way to the other side of the arc with the toes. And then once you're in Urdhva Dhanurasana, you can focus on different aspects of Urdhva Dhanurasana. Like I mentioned, you can reach the chest that way to really get in the thoracic, to really open up the shoulders. It's really deep to really kind of like push into the feet and kind of move towards straight legs to bring the chest that way. That gets really, really deep, so ease into that. Or you can focus on the front of the hips by shifting the weight towards the feet and pressing the hands down and back. So let me show you that one, because it's a really interesting dynamic. You can shift towards the feet and then push through the hands, like if you're pushing the hands down and back, but you're not actually moving them, it's just energetically. So it feels like I'm curling the head back towards my butt. And that really opens up all of this in the body, and it's really an internal action. So I'll repeat that. You shift the weight back into the feet, and then as you press into the feet and lift the pelvis, you're pressing the hands down and back, like you're crawling into the back bend. And then, let me stop here. I'm going to go back to, if you want to focus on opening the thoracic and opening the shoulders, this is a really awesome pose to work on that. So your arms are like in headstand, and then you just straighten the legs, or you don't have to straighten the legs, but you kind of work on bringing the chest over the elbows. Again, super deep. Sometimes, if I feel like that part of my body, come out of it slowly. Sometimes if I feel like that part of my body is tight before Urdhva Dhanurasana, like for example, if I do primary series, or I'm just for whatever reason tighter in this part of my spine, I'll do that before Urdhva Dhanurasana, because then Urdhva Dhanurasana feels a lot nicer. So those are sort of the basic breakdowns of Urdhva Dhanurasana. There's a lot going on. A lot needs to be open and mobile, but also strong to support it. I think oftentimes we look at back bends and we just think flexibility, but so much internal strength needs to be there to support the back bend. If not, you just start to collapse into your spine, and you start to compress the spine. And you need that strength along the spine to find the length before you bend into it. So you want to think about creating space and then going into the back bend so that you don't compress any part along the spine. And in general for back bends, you want to think about evenly distributing the bend throughout the spine. Of course, that's like a really ideal idea to maintain, because all of our spines are different, so it's not going to be perfect. But the feeling, the sense internally is that you're distributing it evenly. Yeah, whether or not that's actually happening because of how your spine is built and how your body is built, but you're getting that sense that you're reaching through both ends of the spine, and you're not favoring one part because maybe it's easier or it's just naturally more flexible, which is usually the lower back.
Because even if that's working for you now, because you're naturally flexible, it most likely won't work forever, and eventually you'll get to a point where you're just in a lot of pain. Yeah, so it's super important to set up some good foundations from the beginning where the back bend feels supported and integrated from the beginning. All right, and then after this, to release the back bend, after your third, so you do 3 Urdhva Dhanurasanas, and in between you just come to the top of the head. After the third one, you come all the way down to your back, and you can do Chakrasana from there, which is like the worst feeling Chakrasana you'll ever do in the whole practice. But it's, it's a good skill to cultivate, to go from back bending into that like super deep forward fold that you need in order to do the backward roll. And then from there you go into a vinyasa, into Chaturanga Dandasana, upward facing dog, downward facing dog. Or you can just come down to your back, rock up to seated, and do the vinyasa. And then from downward facing dog, you jump through to seated and do inhale and exhale, fold forward for 10 breaths. And that forward fold to release the back bend isn't so much about, obviously, this is probably, you know this already, that it's not about lengthening the back of the legs, about the hamstring. So don't worry about like pulling yourself into a super deep forward fold. It's more just about releasing the back, releasing the lower back all along the spine after back bending. So you can hold onto the feet can be active, and you're just gently drawing yourself into a back bend. Sometimes this feels really nice after back bending. Instead of doing with the legs straight, doing like a wide Baddha Konasana, a diamond pose, and then folding forward here. Feels really nice on the lower back, although that's not very conventional to Ashtanga yoga. A conventional release is legs straight, 10 breaths, and then you take a vinyasa, and you go into the closing sequence, which is the same for every series, no matter what you're practicing. And I'll repeat this again. If you're working on more advanced series, like intermediate, third series, or any of the advanced series, after those 3 Urdhva Dhanurasanas, you might add on some more backbending things, which some of them I'll cover in another video. But for the foundation, for primary series, we're usually just working with the 3 Urdhva Dhanurasanas, especially in a guided primary series, and then going straight into the forward fold to release it. All right, that was a lot of information. Let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, have fun doing your back bends.